So last night I'm scrolling around looking for a movie to watch, and I figured why not start something kind of short, something that's probably not too intense, something that's background noise. So I decided to go with this one. I fucking goofed. Well, I remember being in the theater when the trailer for this movie came out, and I remember it was at the time maybe I was seeing Saw, or maybe it was like The Strangers or something like that, but it was the big found footage buzz. I remember this trailer because it kind of stuck out with me, and it looked very realistic for what they were trying to do for found footage compared to most of the other movies. Because in the trailer, they showed a bunch of stock footage from somebody's camera from the killer's POV, and I remember it looked really realistic and different from a lot of other found footage movies. And for some reason, maybe it was I was younger, it always kind of rubbed me as like a creepy movie. And going from there, I remember kind of thinking, like, what happened to that movie I saw in the theaters? And it kind of just disappeared. I'm pretty sure this movie didn't get released. It was like kind of, it was too serious for mainstream movie theaters. And it got to the point where I was kind of interested, and I was like, I remember seeing a trailer for that movie. Maybe I'll check that one out. And the problem watching this movie, it's kind of obvious why it never got released to mainstream theaters, because their subject matter in this movie and the way they go about filming some of the kills from the serial killer, it would have not been as widely accepted then as it probably is now. Now, what makes this movie very weird is there are definitely some very strong elements and there are some very weak elements. But in a way, the way it's trying to be filmed as like a found footage movie from the killer's POV, it kind of creates this perfect storm that I'm not sure they were intentional about capturing. But I think watching after all of these years, it kind of ends up that way. So as a little bit of a background for this movie is about a serial killer who takes place in Poughkeepsie. And what he's doing is he's killing his victims, but he's recording it all on a camera from his POV. So what you're watching is you're watching them backplay the tapes that he's recorded of his gruesome crimes. And with that premise in mind, they do a good job of building up the lore of what the killer is. They make you really feel like this person is a disgusting person. They really make you fear for what you're going to see on the tapes. They just do a really good job at kind of amplifying it all up. And on top of the tapes that are kind of showing what he's doing in terms of gruesome crimes, about half the tapes are just related to this girl he kidnaps and kind of turns into his slave. And as I said, what's very good about this movie is that it's very meta in the way it chooses to tackle the source material, where you have a movie premise in theory that could just be like unwatchably disgusting, and it could be, basically a torture porn movie. But the way they choose to go about it is in the form of a mockumentary where they're constantly bouncing from the police who are working the case and the angles of like profiling a killer and then his footage. So you see them progress their profile of the case and the steps they're taking as a unit. And then you see his tapes progressing of how sinister he is. And as I said earlier, this movie basically doesn't hold back in what it's implying happens. As I said, it's more of a tell, not show, and that works fine. But it has source material that is just not universally accepted by mainstream audiences. They have a lot of explicit sexual assault references, violence against kids, kidnapping. They have limits that most movies are afraid to go, that this movie implies that they are not afraid to go, which really builds into the fact that this is just like a disgusting guy and you really don't want to watch his tapes. And where this movie's at the most effective is when you are watching the tapes, because they've established such a background that he's a disgusting person. You've heard the testimony of the cops. You kind of have a bearing of who this guy is, to the point you don't really want to watch the tapes. So when they show you the tapes, you're worried you're going to see stuff you don't want to see on the tapes, which is highly effective. And if you can get past the severity of the crimes and things that are implied in the movie, that's where this movie's at its most effective. It is genuinely creepy as fuck. And what you have is you have these tapes that are super overexposed. They're grainy. The sound is bad. You can kind of hear him breathing at all times. You can watch the tapes from his POV. And what's really sinister about them is the victims he's interacting with, he killed because they're on his tapes. But you just have to sit there helplessly and watch as he's like building up and, toying with people. And it's just a super sinister thing to watch. And in the tapes, they kind of do a good job of, skating on thin ice when it comes to how they present the killer. So it's not just over the top tacky. It is obviously gruesome or disgusting to watch, but they're very smart in how they portray his crimes to the point that it's pretty believable. You could actually see this footage. Because the way this killer kills, his MO is consistently changing. One of the times he's a police officer, one of the times he's faking as a hitchhiker. As I said, all the footage is super grainy, so it comes off as like raw and unedited, like it's not overexposed in a film studio. And because of that, it's very believable that you can encounter a person like this, as we've seen in documentaries 100 times, where a killer would use these abilities to manipulate a person, so it just makes it even more effective. And when they do get into the gist of the footage and you kind of talk to some of the detectives and they're letting you know what's on the tapes, how the investigation's progressing, this one detective says that he was in charge of watching all the tapes. And he implies that on top of the tapes being gruesome and disgusting, there's just a lot of footage nobody understood, himself included. And to me, this is the most clever dialogue and sentence in the movie because it kind of establishes that they're not just tapes for the sake of being disgusting, but they're also random. And in a realistic environment, they probably would also be random when a person's experimenting and doing other weird things aside from just killing, like kinks and things like that. So I thought that was probably the wisest way to create immersion in these. In getting into this, there's a scene that the detective mentions. He says that he was going through footage for, tens to hundreds of hours and there's a lot of extra footage. And he kept finding this weird balloon footage that he didn't understand. And that's when you first get introduced to the grainy film. And to me, this was easily the most effective scene in the movie and one of the scariest scenes for what it's implying and probably, recent memory for me, where you just have this actress who looks terrified that she's like crawling on all fours. There's this really creepy thing they're doing with balloons. And it was creepy for what it was implying about a person's mental state as opposed to showing you gruesome imagery, which to me worked to be the creepiest scene in the movie by far. Because when the movie ends and I think of what I remember about this movie, what scenes kind of stuck with me, that is easily going to be the scene I will always remember this movie for. But there is a scene that's sort of close. There's another scene where someone's kind of kidnapped and the killer's kind of like crawling on all fours. I don't really want to spoil it in case you do see it, but that one's pretty close, I guess, looking back. But as I said, there's a couple of scenes on this footage that's very hard to watch. It's very creepy, and there's just some images in this movie that are highly effective and will stick with you. But this movie is not without cons, obviously. It's kind of a B film. It's got like a low budget. It's got some poor acting at times, but I was willing to overlook it because I think what it was trying to accomplish was so effective that it kind of overshadowed the weaknesses of the movie. And as I said earlier about The Perfect Storm, it kind of is weird because it's a low budget found footage movie with raw, unedited, gruesome tapes. It kind of works for everyone to be a bad actor. And it kind of works for the editing to not be that good because it gives into the rawness that this could actually be a documentary. Because if you had detectives and you had all the characters in the movie that were amazing actors, it kind of would be, less immersive. You wouldn't feel like these are actual detectives. You'd feel like they're detective actors. So the fact that they're poor actors is probably what you'd get if you interviewed actual detectives. So me personally, I was engaged in this movie start to finish. I'm right in the wheelhouse for this genre. I'm big into serial killer documentaries, horror movies, so it really worked for me. And this is an important point because the way this movie ends up, I see this movie only operating on a spectrum of one of two ways. You kind of have people who will hate this movie, they don't like the acting, they don't get it, it's a snuff film, or people this really works for who got immersed, and I can see this to them being possibly the scariest movie they've ever seen. Because if you're the type of person who finds fear in things that you're told, not shown, like the subtlety of things, this movie could work really well for you. If you find it creepy that a guy next door could be up to this, maybe your neighbor rubbed you the wrong way, you never really understood why. Or maybe it's really scary to you that people can be like this. Or maybe it's scary to you that a guy like this in real life could have gotten away and he's just out there and we don't know about him. If the subtlety of that stuff scares you, like true crime, this movie might terrify you. So overall, I definitely think this is a found footage gem that kind of doesn't get the respect it deserves. They do a very good job at blending the mockumentary with the snuff film progression to kind of create a heightened sense of evolution to the killer that I think really works well that not a lot of movies have tackled before. When I say I really like this movie, it kind of feels weird to say the words that I liked this movie. This is not really a movie you should probably like, as it's very hard to watch. It's very disturbing. The subject matter is very upsetting. It will stick with you. I mean, I felt like I needed a shower after this movie. I'd almost say that I appreciate the movie more than I like the movie, even though I did enjoy watching it. I thought it was a unique take. Because I think it definitely accomplishes what it set out to do, which is to plant the seed of doubt in your head that there are people like this walking around. This guy could be your neighbor. It could be somebody you know. These people could get away. And for that reason, I just think it's highly effective. And it is a movie that will sit with you. You will not forget this movie. And with that, I kind of wish they'd do a remake or, they reboot it or something with a higher budget. But at the same time, that might take away like the rawness and, the time period it came out where people were so in between with found footage. Is it real? Is it not? And I think all of that led to the immersion that makes it pretty powerful. Because to me, I wanted to make this review because I thought this movie was better at what it was trying to accomplish than a lot of found footage movies that get acclaim, such as Blair Witch. And that's not even a knock at Blair Witch. I really liked that movie. I thought it was pretty groundbreaking. I thought some of the stuff they did was really important for scary movies. But when I compare the two, the Poughkeepsie Tapes to me is a lot scarier, and it's not even close. Maybe not scary so much as disturbing and creepy and will stick with you. When I watched the Blair Witch, I kind of, moved on from it and I liked it. But even just after watching this movie for the rest of the day, I kind of just felt slimy. Like I felt like it stuck with me. It's the movie you're not going to forget because of the premise it's trying to push. So yeah, have you guys seen this movie? What do you think? I know it's super old. I'm just kind of going back and hitting some of the classics. kind of interested in what people thought of this movie because it was so controversial at the time. So if you haven't seen this movie, what is your favorite found footage movie, or maybe a movie that unsettled you, like a movie that's unsettling as shit and you can't rewatch it? Because I'm not sure I'm going to rewatch this movie, but I did appreciate what it was trying to do. Let me know in the comments down below if you liked what you saw here. Feel free to subscribe. There's going to be more videos. As always, guys, take care and stay safe.